recorded in Little Italy, Louisiana. Welcome to Pinstripe Valley, the official Mobcast with A.P. Fanini.
Ladies and gentlemen, made men and wise guys alike, welcome to the Pinstripe Valley official Mobcast with me, that guy, A.P. Fanini. Thank you all so much for joining me today. I sincerely appreciate it. I guarantee you I have some special knowledge for you today. But first and foremost, and as always, I want to thank all of the people who purchased my book and who supported me and continue to support me. Thank you so much. And have continued to help make sure that this book stays at 5 stars on Amazon. Guys, thank you for that. I don't know what to say. I am actually extremely surprised, not that the book has done so well, but you know, that there's been so much part taken, so much participation in all the things that like I've done for promotion of this book, and I appreciate it so much. So thank you guys for, if you ever shared the link or, you know, watched the videos I've made and like tried to promote the book, thank you so much for that. And thank you for your kind words. I've gotten private messages on you know, social media telling me that they enjoyed the book. That means the world to me. You know, that's like I don't know what to say. It's worth its weight in gold and probably more. I don't know. It might be up there with tequila or something special like that. I don't know. We'll see. But thank you so much for that. And if you're listening to the Mobcast now and you haven't heard about the book, or you know, you're not familiar with it, it's called The Gatekeepers, and the second book in the series called The Gatekeepers Entry 2, Warm Barrels, Cold Blood. If you're looking for a good Mafia story, you're looking for suspense and action, and you're looking for an escape from pretty much anything sane, make sure you check this book out. Please do. It's my book. I hope you do enjoy it if you do. And now, let's get on with the Mobcast. So, what we're going to talk about today on the show is we are going to cover a few of the many rackets of the American Mafia. For me to sit here and try to count all of them, even by personal memory, I would get absolutely lost because there were so many rackets that they had. Their entire I almost want to say reason for existence, but I mean, in their mind, it was a way of life. So in their mind, yes, their perception is their entire reason for existence, especially if you're a made man, is to serve your family, to serve the family of the Cosa Nostra that you are with, that you have pledged your life and allegiance to. So everything that you do from that point on is to make money. And in order to make money, you have to be part of a racket because they're not going to do anything that's legal. So the majority of everything, if not somewhat or completely, from somewhat to completely is the meter usually of the percentage of illegal that it is. It usually is somewhat illegal to this is completely illegal. Okay. Now, most of these rackets are overseen by several people, and I'll get somewhat into that because what I really want to go into today is the racket itself and how it makes money for the families and for the person that's trying to make it, and how it's distributed. So when I first tried to come up with a list of all these things, I went scatterbrained as shit, and I was like, they do everything. Like, where do I even begin? So I want to go ahead and tip my hat to a website called thenewyorkmafia.com. And for those of you who are a bit of a mafioso historian yourself, this website is pretty phenomenal. And I'm under the mob racket section, and they have a great list of, you know, to start with. And I thought this was, so I went ahead and used their list, did my own little research, but their list is, you know, the really, I don't even know what I'm looking for right now because I'm taking a look at it, but it's very, very well consolidated. That's what I'll say. And so their list, I'm only going to go over a couple of them, but I'm going to go over their list right now. The first on the list is the truck hijacking racket, which I will talk about today. The second is gambling, which I will also cover. Narcotics, definitely going to cover that one today. The jukebox and vending machine racket, the cigarette and bootlegging racket, garbage racketeering, the loan sharking racket, Those types of things. And to be totally honest, the loan sharking racket and the gambling racket really do go hand in hand. They are intertwined directly due to the fact that these areas where the people gather to gamble or put their bets in or, owe their money to a bookmaker, this is where the loan sharks and the Shylockers, this is their breeding ground. This is where they make their money. It's for those who get too deep in debt and they have to. But we'll cover that. We'll cover that. I'm getting a little ahead of myself here. But so the first thing that I want to cover that was on the list is truck hijacking. Truck hijacking. Loads of merchandise just being held up. And now I know this, it seems like something, well, hell, there's GPSs on cars now. How the hell is something going to get, yeah, definitely. Even then, in the 70s, 60s, truck hijacking was still a huge thing, dating all the way back, to the late 1930s. Pure thefts in New York, maybe not so much of truck hijackings, pure thefts in New York, in New Jersey, people aligned with the International Longshoremen's Union. Local or long distance transportation wasn't quite the thing yet. So docks were the places they would go. The minute that Harry Truman delegated to have interstates created in his New Deal, the 5 families in New York jumped on this like a pack of wild dogs on the 3-legged cat. And is the minute that local and long distance transportation was implemented, that was it. They delved into this racket. During the bootlegging era of Al Capone and the entire beer wars, gangsters, they hijacked huge trucks of bootlegged alcohol. They even, you know what, let me back that up for a minute because I just realized something. President Harry Truman, he delegated to have interstates created in the New Deal. So, and then I jump right back to the 1930s. My apologies. I have that kind of brain frequency. My apologies. But back to the beer wars and the Prohibition era. They hijacked shipments of their rival bootleggers, so they hijacked each other. So somebody steals liquor and alcohol and cigarettes or whatever, and then you come along and then steal the shit they just stole. That's like slapping them in the face and then coming back with a backhand. So these types of things, this is why so many people died. 700 plus people died during the beer wars because people like to steal shit and people like to steal each other's shit. That's really just how that goes. And these men, which I had covered in a previous Mobcast, they were absolute sociopaths. And when it came to money, even before the 5 families were even, constructed, these men were still, would still stop at nothing to be on top, to be the king. They always have that somewhat monarchy frame of mind, that perception on life that I have to be the king, the best. And whatever insinuation or whatever, dream that they were living, that's pretty much those who, like Al Capone and Lucky Luciano, that's what they believed they did to ascend atop that mountain or that ladder of success within the realms of La Cosa Nostra. So, I mean, even during that time, before Prohibition had even occurred, robbers who were also in the mob, they were called highwaymen because they would wait along these highways and these empty roads, and they would just wait for cars to come by or for trucks to come by. And the minute that they would, they immediately stopped the car with whatever reason. My engines broke down, they're waving their hands, something would happen. And then guns would come out, they would be purged of their personal belongings, and that entire truck would be taken along with the car that they were in, and the driver would be stranded in bumfuck. Right. And that's the way that they would operate, and that's part of the racket. So jumping back to what I was saying earlier, President Harry Truman delegated to have interstates created in the New Deal. So when this happened, this was almost like opening a pack of fresh bloody ass steak around a bunch of psychotic lions. They came and tore this apart. Not just the 5 families, the Chicago outfit, several areas around Philadelphia. There were truck hijackings all over the place the minute that they were able to be transported across the country so seamlessly. it's almost like inviting the animals in. And it was not advantageous at all until they were able to really crack down on this type of thing, especially now we have GPS and so many different forms of communication while traveling. But with the Chicago outfit, things like razors, cigarettes, all kinds of small, minute products, all these things were being stolen. You're thinking, yeah, that's, some razors, some cigarettes, so on and so forth. The loads that they stole were worth to up to $300,000. And to imagine to do this many times a week, so many times a week, and then flip it and sell it for, this is what they did for a living. I mean, it's like a lot of people that I have spoken to before, when having this conversation, it's like, what did they do all day? Did they just, sleep all day? Yeah, probably. When you have a 9 to 5 and you're working all day long, the mob was, sitting around thinking of ways to, get money for illegally and a lot easier than you're getting it. And that's really what the entire premise of it was. And if you really put it into perspective, this is the entire life that they're willing to die for. It's a life that comes with, it has so many pros and cons that stack up against each other. It's like you have VIP status everywhere. You're well respected. You have money coming out of your, mouth and ass. You have expensive clothes, expensive cars. You can have anyone, all those things. But also on the other hand, if you step out of line or say the wrong thing, you die. If you steal or someone even thinks you steal, you die. If your friend is a traitor, then they will call upon you to kill your friend to test your loyalty, because if you don't kill that friend, then they'll kill you, and vice versa. So if they even think that that you are some sort of problem, if they even think that you are infringing upon the profits that they are trying to acquire with these rackets, you're going to die. So just a little food for thought there when it comes to being in the mafia. So truck hijacking, immense problem, but made the mafia so much money at one time, until the FBI eventually really just started hammering down on it. Like I said, the RICO stature really brought a lot of these human mountains down, especially when the 5 heads were taken down in the same day through the RICO stature that Rudy Giuliani had made in federal court. That was just like cutting the head, like taking these 5 men out was like cutting the head off of a giant snake. That was it. They were left in shambles for such a long time. And it wouldn't be until John Gotti that they would kind of try to put pieces back together. But, that was pretty much, to me, John Gotti was the mafia's retirement tour. It's like, one more time, we'll have this guy go be all about the press, blah, 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 blah. And then whatever. I don't know. I totally got lost in that thought. Let's move on. Gambling. Gambling is something that I definitely want to cover because it's been such an integral part of the mafia's earnings for such a long time. And why? Why was it so easy? Gambling is probably, other than narcotics that they had, because I'm nothing beats that when it came to the profit game, but gambling was the most lucrative outside of that of the mafia rackets. And it wasn't just because there was so much money involved. It wasn't just because the stakes were high and people were putting up a lot of money. It's because the mafia, like I said before, it feels like they already had it psychologically broken down, in their own twisted way. They recognized the outcome from people's gambling vices considerably early. I mean, knowing this from way back, wherever there's a poker game, Shylockers and loan sharks were sure to be present, like I'd said earlier. Like this was how they tied loan sharking and gambling into each other. It was deemed so socially acceptable because everybody liked to gamble. And since everybody liked to gamble, it was socially acceptable in comparison to this laundry list of crimes that the mafia had already committed. This, quote, victimless crime, which that is what is officially classified as, the reason to go behind it was the reason for it to go under the radar so easily. It was deemed almost irrelevant. It was societally placed on the back burner, because, like I said, the laundry list was long. And it's so universally partaken in. So nobody's going to say anything about gambling. If gambling gets busted, the penalties are extremely lax. The charges didn't even make it out of a city or state courtroom. So you didn't even go to federal court for these types of things. The highest sentence you would probably get during this absolute worst case scenario is maybe 4 years of prison, 5 years probation with some fines. And I can guarantee you, especially if it's deemed that this type of soft, lax penalty of that sort, they're not going to serve the full 5 years. That will be probably taken off for good behavior, whatever. And they will, and once that happens, and some fines, and they will gallantly pay these fines to get back on the streets to do the same thing again, and probably something worse. It wasn't until the RICO statute, used by Southern New York U.S. Attorney Rudolph Giuliani during the Operation Donnie Brasco, that's when the government started cracking down harder on gambling offenses and attempting to tie them into a RICO trial. And that's whenever, instead of it going from 4 to 5, 4 years in prison, 5 years probation, it goes to 100 years, 99 years, life sentence, so on, possibly putting them in prison for the rest of their life. And that holding the entirety of the mob family as a whole, being accountable for all criminal activity committed therein. This is how the only way that the gambling rackets could be clearly taken down, completely eviscerated, is through the RICO Act. So many people accepted gambling. It's unreal. But nobody really knew the history of shylocking that went along with gambling. And so it's not just gambling. So before I get to shylocking, I will say that the many forms of gambling they had, most people think of cards and casinos and so on and so forth, or maybe horse races. Yes, all of those things, anything that be considered bookmakers. There was a time many years ago in the newspaper where 3 numbers would be at a certain part of the newspaper, and it would represent numbers in a secret lottery that was being held by the local mob. It's that kind of thing. And there's more to it. But what I'm saying is anything that could be considered, favored in their favor by the ratio of the number situation that they're dealing with. Anything like that, they were definitely had both hands in. And they were doing their best to make as much money from it as they possibly could. And the people that played the lottery also did not come out unscathed at all, because sometimes it would be the odds are 500 to 1. You pay for, anyone who paid for $1 ticket, for all those people that paid for a ticket, you get $500. That's the kind of stakes they played with. So people that played in this also got huge payoffs in the end, and with zero taxes. And this is what made the government start to scratch their heads, and they went from scratching their heads to grabbing their pens, and and the rest is history. So shylocking and loan sharking, which I'll jump directly to that from the gambling rackets, because all these gambling rackets, whether poker, horses, whatever, they all have, when I mentioned the vices earlier, they're usually, these areas are inhabited by, most of the time, very chronic gamblers, or people they know that they like to feel them out first. It's all part of what they would call a bust out, and a bust out meaning that they actually take someone in lieu of their debt for basically all of their money. So I'll give you an example. Someone loses at a card game and they take out a loan, and they feel like if they take out the loan they can win their money back, and they're really just pushing chance with the mafia here. And so they take the money out, to hopefully against the money that they're already down, and they try to win it back. Well, if they lose that money, then now they owe the mafia money. If they don't give the mafia the money immediately, every day or week that passes, depending on the payment plan they have worked out, a percentage is drawn. So we'll say that they have to pay them weekly. Every week that they don't have the full principal of, let's say they owe $15,000. If they don't have that full principal every day, they take 10 to 15% of the principal, and or 10 to 15% of it gets tacked on to the principal. So 10 to 15% of $15,000 gets added on every week that the full $15,000 isn't paid back. So basically what I'm trying to say is if you get caught up in this situation, you are fucked. That's all I can say. That is literally the best analogy there is for that. It's much like, Tony Soprano said, the only step after this is bankruptcy, right? So being caught up in these type of shylocking businesses, you owe the mafia, you don't have the money, they will come and visit you. You don't have, if you're late on a date, someone will come and see you. All because you wanted to push luck in gambling. These gambling rackets were the doorway to making sure that people gave every penny they had to the Mafia. And when they didn't have any penny, they were giving away things. They owe their life to the Mafia now. And it's so weird to once again revisit the entire psychological thing that the Mafia has with their victims, for them to just feel in their mind, they're like, we can own you for the rest of your life, but we're justified for it because you lost in a card game and we loaned you some money, you know? So it's like, instead of being like a bank where we mess with your credit, we're going to take a couple fingers, you know? We might saw off your foot. I don't know. You know what I mean? That was a pretty big sum of money that you took from us, you know? So give me that wrist, you know? So loan sharking, gambling go hand in hand. No way to get around that. And their entire world depends on these people paying. So guaranteed, they're not going to miss a beat when it comes to stuff like that. What I want to talk about now, that seems to still be a problem or still be a thing within the Mafia for some people. I never thought that I would live in a time where I could say that I saw one of the most famous government cooperators from the Mafia. I never thought I would see him on YouTube making videos and getting views and like talking all kinds of wise guy madness. And also that I would see someone, a previous capo regime in the Colombo family, Michael Francis, the man who made the most money in the Mafia in history, statistically, also doing YouTube videos about finding God. That's fine. I feel like I'm in the Twilight Zone sometimes. And the reason why I bring that up is because Sammy the Bull Gravano, Sammy the Bull, for those of you who don't know who Sammy the Bull Gravano is, I know I've talked about him before, but was the right-hand man, friend, and underboss to Gambino family boss John Gotti. This man went on trial, cooperated with the police, allegedly after hearing John Gotti make a lot of remarks about Sammy that would honestly completely severed all ties and friendship he had with the man. So it was bad enough what he heard on the recording for him to cooperate with the police and say, I have nothing for this man. So with all that being said, he went on TV, national news covered the footage. He basically came right out and said, I have agreed to cooperate with the police. I have participated in over 19 murders. So this man, who was given, I guess, served some time, did some witness protection, heavy witness protection, because he's pretty sought after a lot of people. But this man was involved also after in a ecstasy ring. And so with that being said, it just goes to show that even now, for those whose entire life has been completely circled around crime, the narcotics industry is still extremely lucrative, and the guys who were looking for money-making schemes before can still see this as clear as daylight. And going back through the annals of time here to look and see where all of this started, it started just like you would maybe imagine, I would say, with the potency of the drug. Marijuana used to be looked at as, it's kind of had its ups and downs in the country. So at some point it was looked at like, you know, the next opium. And then at some point it was completely phased out and not even considered a threat. And then it went right back to it during a war on drugs. But that's something for a podcast from someone else. But, you know, barbiturates, things like that, yellow jackets, all the amphetamines, all of the hallucinogens, all those things, all these man-made lab manufactured things have been something that the mob has taken part in for a very long time. And like I've said in many videos and other Mobcasts, the Mafia has always looked down upon the distribution of narcotics and drugs. They always looked at it as a trashy way to do things. It was supposedly, but many people secretly and sometimes just blatantly out in the open, you know, out of sheer, I guess, boldness, decided to manufacture the majority of these drugs, and they made money hand over fist. No question whatsoever, no matter what era of the Mafia, we're talking whether it be Prohibition, the 70s wars with Philadelphia, the time of John Gotti in the 90s, it does not matter. Narcotics has always been the most lucrative and highest profited racket that the Mafia has ever undertaken, no matter whether it's a moral compass thing or not. So a lot of things from the beginning, weed, cocaine, things like that, I mean, that's a given. But when we mentioned the lab ones, we mentioned the things like ecstasy and things like heroin, things that nature. Like, yes, heroin's made from poppy plants, but definitely very synthetic by the time it's done. Well, by the time it's out of its infancy stage of being, completely chemically induced. I'm not. You know what? I sound like a junkie. Let me move on. So. The narcotics rings in America, and I got to be 100% honest with you, being from Louisiana, I am not surprised at all that in 1937, there was a historic multi-state heroin and opium smuggling ring that was shut down by the United States government, and it was in Texas and Louisiana. And if anybody who's listening to this, you can laugh silently because you're not even laughing. You already know that you believe this 100% without a doubt. The Federal Bureau of Narcotics and Dangerous Drugs, which was actually basically the precursor or the predecessor of the current DEA or Drug Enforcement Administration, had these people. They literally had to do things they had never done before. They had seen milestones in this operation that they had never encountered because they had never had to track down a operation of narcotics of this magnitude. And the ring was so large, being moved between two states, so many hands were involved in this pie. A major sweep was executed. Dozens, it was, probably up in the hundreds of narcotics importers, dealers, everywhere from Texas, New Orleans, Dallas, all these places, all across the nation. It was a huge, huge sweep. I love this website. Huge sweep. And 74 defendants in all. That's how large this was. And this is in 1937. Let's not even get into the fact of what the rings look like now, which is why the drugs are so dangerous now, because they touch so many hands. But when it came to narcotics, most of the time, especially if there was an old head in charge, if they found out you were dealing drugs, especially in their family, you were dead. There was no question to it. If you yourself were addicted to drugs, especially the heavy stuff, you were dead. You were looked at as a liability. Selling drugs in the family makes you look like an open wound to the DEA and the FBI. The old heads knew this. The old heads also tried to remain completely inconspicuous. Walking around with sunglasses on, only coming out in certain parts of the day. They tried to remain inconspicuous because they knew what would happen. They had it ingrained in their head that too much attention is a problem. And there were many mobsters who either didn't figure that out or just didn't give a shit. And there's a laundry list of both. So with that being said, narcotics all the way down, the list goes on forever. And there is no, especially now, you can literally go through the New York Times and other local newspapers or national. Anything mentioned, a lot of things mentioned about New York, whether it's mob related or not, lots and lots of drugs, a plethora of drug busts and things like that, and rings being shut down. The main thing I would say now that the Mafia has been suspected, and actually, of course, they've been caught in, because that's where a lot of the witnesses came from, was heroin distribution. That's what gets them every time. Being caught with marijuana or cocaine or something like that, it's not any kind of charge to scoff at, depending on what state you're in. But I will say this, heroin being traded up to a prison sentence of 30 years to life looking dead at you, a lot of these men don't want to serve that. And I can't say that I blame them, because it definitely sounds like it sucks. Just not even on paper, just saying it out loud. 30 to life. 30 to life, or turn some guys in who would probably blow your ass off. I'm not condoning to being a rat. I'm just trying to figure out their psychology. But I digress. So, yeah, so all of these, different rings, different hands were coming into the pie, into the mafia. Um, as time went on, as it still is, different dealers, people who were no longer, deep within the mafia circle, who were no longer had close ties and had a lot of close and long-term camaraderie and longevity with these mafia families. It was different people coming in. Maybe some of them knew the game well, some of them didn't, some of them made bad decisions. And these were these decisions made by outsiders and many other bad decisions of mobsters who weren't completely in tune with the drug game in general are the reason why they all got busted by the FBI. So at the end of the day, the entire thing was consorted of a bunch of dumbasses. I mean, it is what it is. They had great money. They had a phenomenal amount of money. They had, I've gone over this 1,000 times what the mob had, but that does not mean that they were smart by any means. They just knew how to make money. They knew one thing and they knew how to do it well, but that does not mean that they were invincible. So the narcotics racket, another main reason why that the bosses had such a big problem with it is because it came with such a long prison sentence, especially after the RICO statute was used. So once they discovered that one of the people in their family, once the FBI has caught on to this scheme or these drug rings of heroin especially, and cocaine or whatever else it is they have their hands in, these heroin charges, sum up to 30 to life, will be dealt out to everyone that is connected to them and can be proven in court. So they're looking at these people like this is a 30 to life year sentence walking around in front of me right now, literally making my life a lot harder. Kill him. That's it. So there is that. Narcotics has been used for years, still used today, still the most lucrative racket. Thousands of pounds of cocaine, thousands of pounds of heroin. All you need is a newspaper. That's one racket that will probably never go away, no matter what shape or form the distribution is. And now that we've covered that, I also wanted to point out too, I didn't mention earlier, this whole garbage racketeering thing. Such an older facade of waste management of every mobster being involved in the garbage business. I just think that's an interesting side note. I don't know why that is. I guess because it's such an easy thing to to mask when it becomes a shell company of something much larger behind it. The cigarette bootlegging, or that type of thing that I did mention earlier, which was done mostly with trucks. Cigarettes and alcohol during the Prohibition era were like gold in the hands of Americans, hands of mobsters, but it was the Americans that were buying it that were keeping this racket so heavy. In the same roundabout as drugs at the time, since they were being so illegal, this had America in quite the frenzy. Between the Great Depression and on up, when the Depression was over and the First World War and the post-war economy was a lot better and there was a lot easier living. This is during the time when Prohibition era. This is the time when bootlegging took its flight. Al Capone, who I mention a lot when it comes to the Prohibition era, he and Johnny Torrio had such a hand in this type of thing. And they made, hand over fist, annually $120 million from this operation, from this entire process of stealing alcohol or having alcohol made and then just selling it to the public tax-free and at a cheaper price. And at some point, the bootlegging went from, it turns into one thing and completely goes into something else. But it seems like it's the same thing because it went from bootlegging directly into extortion. See, this bootlegging outfit that these men had, the majority of mobsters had, in this era of the Prohibition era, in the early 20s, 30s, and a couple of decades after, they all began threatening vendors that didn't buy their beer. So it goes from, you have the choice of buying this beer at extremely cheap price. Say a vendor says, I don't want to deal with your kind. He's like, okay, so now that we have offered that you to pay for this beer at a cheap price and you haven't, you will buy our beer. Goodbye. And that's it. So it went from that, and if that didn't happen, hundreds of bars and beer halls during that time were burned to ashes because they wouldn't cooperate with the mob. And that was just like, Al Capone taking a sip of his coffee and moving on to the next. Kind of like I'm about to do right now. One sec. Okay, I'm done. Anyway, Al Capone and Johnny Torrio had their hands around Chicago when it came to, bootlegging, mainly alcohol. Bootlegging cigarettes was another huge thing. It was all about, I feel like, the money itself, not just because they were selling things that weren't, approved or whatever. If that was even a thing then, I need to do a little research on that. But also for the fact that, like, they weren't paying taxes on anything. And I, being the man that I am, feel like that was the reason why that they came down so hard on the Mafia. Because if you really think about it, another huge racket would be money laundering and, the extortion that comes with all of these different things. If you really break it down, all of these different criminal activities in organized crime. Really just imagine, if you will, that this was the American government's money, not just the taxes, but all this was the American government's money. And the point I'm getting at is when you look at the certain aspects of some of government activity, it's almost as if the Mafia, all these resources they had were allocated in the federal case, especially with the Operation Donnie Brasco, was to shut down the Mafia to, quote, protect the innocent. But in some cases, it could be seen that they were getting rid of the competition. And I don't want to get too political because this is not a political podcast, but I will say wholeheartedly, with full confidence, that the government does do things somewhat the way that the Mafia used to. It just, it's more clear cut, it's legal, and it just, for a lack of better words, looks prettier. And that's all I have to say about that. So I just thought since I was doing a Mobcast about racketeering, I would mention the government. And that is all that I will say about that. So the last thing that I did want to cover, and I wanted to mention it on its own because it does go in with extortion, is the loan sharking racket. And now loan sharking itself has been around a century. I don't know. It's been around for a long, long time. Shylocking, whatever it's called, loaning money out to someone and then expecting the money back quickly. And if it's not back at a certain time, high interest rates for when it's not. Extremely high interest rates. Pretty much a game that's fixed for anyone involved that they will never be able to pay back. And so many loans have been given out more than just for times of gambling. The original loan sharking, and probably its most notorious of times, was during and after the Great Depression. And for those of you who aren't familiar with the Great Depression, most are just during a time where an absolute economic collapse in the early 1900s of this country. And so this was a time whenever these loans were given out by the handfuls. People were coming out of nowhere because they got to feed their family, got to keep the heat on, got to keep whatever it is that they have. The bills have to be paid. Money's got to come from somewhere. I've done this. I've done that. Jobs are in the least. The job economy is terrible. It's total shit. So what have I got to do now? Got to go talk to some guy. Got to go talk to a wise guy. Got to talk to them. This is how they made their money. And there's no shame in it from them at all. For whatever reason, if it's because they feel justified that they're making money for a family they pledge allegiance to, it could be because they just didn't care. Could be greed. Doesn't matter, but there is no reason. They will take someone who is down on their luck and press them even farther down. That, basically in a nutshell, was the racketeering business of loan sharking, is to take a victim and to literally make them even more of a victim. So with those types of loans going on, these loans continued, and people in corporate worlds and companies began to get involved with the mob. And I could go into several different time zones, but this probably still happens today. A cut of each type of business that's being put in. Mobs are involved with large construction companies and garbage racketeering and waste management. things like that. Any type of extremely large project that can be flown under the radar with a little bit of the money skimmed off the top and given to the mob, with threats of violence in return if not done. It's a lot harder to do that nowadays because of so much surveillance. But then, loan sharking, that type of activity, it was, I would say, in their eyes, flawless. Because it's literally what their entire foundation was built upon. And so, in turn, or to say that loan sharking would, if someone were to say that loan sharking would probably be, or loan sharking is the foundation to which the mentality of this type of living or this type of lifestyle is built, I'd have to agree, because it covers every single basis. It all boils down to money and extortion, and that's both are covered under loan sharking, and I think everything else is either a doorway or just a glorified version. But even so, the only difference is the amount of money they make and how fast they can make it, and who doesn't see when they make it, and who you can pay to turn the other way. Because the majority of these rackets, I gotta stop using the word majority so much. A large number of these rackets were protected by the authorities because they were paid off, aka dirty cops. They helped the rackets along a lot more. So when there was an interest of green, that's what helped these rackets stay afloat for a lot of the time that they were in power, that the Mafia was in power, were dirty cops. So when this system all worked together for all of these rackets, this is the reason why they had such a heavy grip around these cities, especially in the East Coast, and their economy, and their influence over the government, and their influence at one point over presidential elections, because they had the money to back it. And the people, who are supposed to be the authority were easily swayed by money. And that's also what it boils down to. And I guess we could call that a racket as well. But if I was going to go into the actual racketeering business that the government is involved in, once again, I digress. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for joining me today. That was the Mobcast. I hope you enjoyed it. Like I said earlier, I once again want to thank everybody for purchasing my book from the series, The Gatekeepers 1 and The Gatekeepers Entry 2, available on Amazon, Kindle, and everywhere else books are sold. Thank you so much for that. And I also want to thank everyone who has subscribed to my YouTube that this is on right now. Right now, the podcast, the Mobcast, and my Mob Gods are actually exclusive to YouTube right now until I extend to other platforms. And also, and I wanted to save the best for last here, for all of my fans out there who are also, and I can see this, a lot of my fans being a lot of paranormal and science fiction readers. If you guys want something that is absolutely breathtaking, if you want some, I have a perfect author for you to check out. Bonnie Taylor is her name, and she is the author of many, many titles. She is available on Amazon, all of her works. I want to talk about just one. The name of the book that I'm talking about is called Zach's Guitar. And I don't want to give any spoilers away, but I do want to, I know I don't want to give any spoilers away, but then I give you like the complete premise, but it doesn't ruin much. But it's so incredible to read a story about a kid with a guitar that allows him to travel between dimensions. So this is not your father's Fender, kids. This book is absolutely insanely amazing, and it is congenial to all ages. I suggest you pick up that work. And this is not even a drop in the bucket to her Not Forgotten series and several other things that she's written. But the Zach's Guitar is something, me being, someone who does enjoy these types of stories. I do think that the whole concept of the guitar allowing this kid to travel through dimensions, through vibrations, is absolutely astounding. And to read it and to see the premise and how the story plays out, and just to see the plot reveal itself the way it does, she's an absolutely outstanding writer. And I suggest check her out, Bonnie Taylor. But anyway, that's all for the Mobcast today. Thank you so much for joining me. I hope you all have a great day, and I will see you next time.